Okay, welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity special panel on the environment called Faith in Humanity to Solve the Climate Crisis, featuring Karenna Gore, Ruth Ivory-Moore, Jim Antal, and Patrick Carolan. Please stick around for the discussion afterwards when we can take your questions live. Now let's go to this special panel called Faith in Humanity to Solve the Climate Crisis. Thank you so much for joining us for this 11 Days of Global Unity panel for the Environment Campaign. And we call it Faith in Humanity to Solve the Climate Crisis. Do we have that faith? To answer that question and others, we will hear from some extraordinary activists in the faith community: Patrick Carolan, Karenna Gore, Jim Antal, and Ruth Ivory-Moore. My name is Rick Ulfik, and I am the founder of We the World at we.net. And I co-created the concept of 11 Days of Global Unity with my dear friend, Troy Lush. We the World is a global coalition building organization with 11 campaigns for change. You can take action with us by going to we.net. I want to acknowledge Jim Garrison and Rick Buckley with Humanity Rising and Ubiquity University for collaborating with We the World to broadcast this panel and the entire 11 Days of Global Unity Summit. We are celebrating our 17th anniversary of 11 Days of Global Unity. Over the years, 11 campaigns for change have developed out of 11 days, and today's discussion will be on one of them, the environment theme. To lead the discussion, I would like to bring in Patrick Carolan. Patrick Carolan is a Catholic activist, writer, instigator, and thinker. He served as the executive director of the Franciscan Action Network. He co-founded the Global Catholic Climate Movement and helped start the Faithful Democracy Coalition. His writing and activism are centered on his understanding and belief through Franciscan spirituality of the connectedness of all creation and God. He consults with Vote Common Good and We the World. Welcome to the broadcast, Patrick Carolan.
Thank you, Rick, and welcome. We're living in a perilous time. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. Where I live in East Haven, Connecticut, we just had 2 hurricanes over a 2-week period. They caused a great deal of damage and loss of life. This has never happened in my lifetime. We might get hit with 1 hurricane every 5 years or so. I remember when I first started getting involved in the environmental justice movement, we would talk about sustainability. The United Nations developed a whole series of sustainability goals. We talked about how if we don't change, instead of sustainability, we would be talking about survivability. Well, we've reached that point. We as a society, as people, have failed to take the issue of climate change seriously enough, so now we are in a climate crisis. As a person of faith, I believe that we are all connected to each other and to all creation. We cannot continue to pretend that what happens across the globe has no effect on us, or vice versa. This is a lesson that we should have learned from the climate crisis, but we didn't. We only need to look at what happened during COVID to understand that we still don't understand. So now, where do we go and how do we get there? I'm so blessed and grateful to be here today with 3 people that I have a tremendous respect and admiration for the work that they have done and for the work that they continue to do. I would first like to introduce Ruth Ivory-Moore. Ruth serves in the leadership role as Program Director, Environment and Corporate Social Responsibility with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. She is responsible for the direct oversight of climate change, finance, investment, agriculture, and energy policy planning in this role. Ruth also orchestrates the corporate social responsibility and sustainability roundtables. Before joining the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Ruth held senior positions in the chemical and energy sectors. Her broad area of expertise include policy, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, compliance, climate change and environmental awareness, arbitration and energy. She's married, the mother of 2 children, and a grandson and the grandmother of 2 grandsons. Besides God, family is the most important and drives her enthusiasm. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Reverend Jim Antal. Jim is a denominational leader, a climate activist, an author, and a public theologian. He serves as special advisor on climate justice to the General Minister and President of the United Church of Christ. Antal's book, Climate Change and Climate World, was featured in the Chicago Tribune on Earth Day 2018. Jim Antal received a 2019 Steward of Creation Award from the National Religious Coalition for Creation Care. And from Yale Divinity School, he was honored with the William Sloan Coffin Award for Peace and Justice. And probably Jim will tell you the most important thing he's done in his life is that he served as a graduate assistant to Henry Nouwen while he was at Yale. And our third panelist is Karenna Gore. She's the founder and director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. The Center for Earth Ethics bridges the worlds of religion, academia, policy, and culture to discern and pursue the changes that are necessary to stop the ecological destruction and create a society that values the long-term health of the whole. Currently, she is serving on the board of ABC and Riverkeeper. She has also worked as a writer and is the author of Lighting the Way, 9 Women Who Changed Modern America. Karenna is a graduate of Harvard College, Columbia Law School, Union Theological Seminary. She lives in New York City with her 3 children. So let's start in. And we'll start with our first question. Do you have faith in humanity to solve the current climate crisis? And we'll start off with Reverend Jim Antal for this.
Well, Patrick, thank you very much for those introductions and also for pulling this together with these thoughtful questions. I tried to wrap my head around this, and it's not that easy, but there is something easy that at least I can say at the beginning, and I'm sure my colleagues here will have much more to say about this, and that is the most hidden reality of the climate crisis is that scientists have already provided humanity with all the solutions we need to restore God's creation. All that's missing is the will to do so. And for me, that's what your question comes down to. Does the current generation have the will, the moral turpitude, and ultimately the love to pay attention to God's call to make the systemic changes needed to restore our common home? So I'll just put that out there as a beginning. And Karenna or Ruth, please go ahead.
Ruth? Yes, and I'm happy to chime in. And I think the simple answer is yes. For the simple reason we have no choice. There is absolutely no plan B here. I could go around and quote statistics or give huge dollar figures regarding the costs or the toll in human lives or health issues that the impact of climate change has caused. But the simple fact is that we have to have faith. And as human beings and as people of faith, we recognize our role as steward of creation. We know that remedying the destruction of our home, the earth, is a moral obligation. If we go back to the beginning, visualizing Adam standing in for humankind, taking on, receiving the vocation to till the ground, creation care, we know that we must embrace and recall that for Christians, care of the earth is not just an environmental cause, but it is rooted in our DNA, is rooted in our theological belief. It is central to our holy calling to treasure the earth and to care for all in our typical home earth, fully integrating creation care into everything that we do, recognizing that our neighbor is not just our person next door, but neighbor is community, neighbor is global. And we have to understand that if one of us hurts, we all hurt. And so we just have to claim our role, and we have to have faith that we are going to resolve this crisis. But we do need to move from activism to action, and time is running out. Karenna?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Rick, and Patrick, and Jim, and Ruth. I'm so honored to be with all of you in this discussion. I do have faith in humanity to solve the climate crisis if we change our way of thinking, if we make a shift in values. And I say this because I do believe we are in real danger of thinking that we can solve this with simply new technologies, with simply the same faith in markets, and in a kind of top-down solution that comes only from the same places that have brought us to where we are now. And I truly believe that that faith in humanity is much deeper than that. There's a lot of different definitions of faith. I do like that scriptural definition from Hebrews, the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. We need to draw more deeply from our faith and wisdom traditions in this world. We have always held that values run deeper than price tags or politics, that life has meaning, including non-human life, and that we are ultimately accountable to some power higher than ourselves. So if we come together in that way and realize that the system that has been governing, the dominant system that has been driving ecological destruction, that does not count or measure pollution, that doesn't look at depletion like deforestation, like degradation of soils and so on, that does not count inequality and inequity around the world. We need to change that way of thinking. And so I believe, I do have faith in humanity to solve the climate crisis, but I believe that the communities represented by the people in this conversation, by the 11 days of global unity, actually represent precisely the level of engagement that we need to really do so.
Thank you all. I'm going to pipe in a little bit and follow up with what Karenna said. I think it was about 50 years ago. There's a man named Lynn White who was not a faith leader, wasn't a scientist. I think he was a cultural historian. And he said that the whole environmental crisis is partly a result of our faith. That until we really rethink our theology, that we're never going to be able to move forward and change. That's the same thing that John Muir said 150 years ago. And it's kind of the same thing that St. Francis of Assisi said some 800 years ago. And so when we talk about faith, and people generally associate faith with religion, but religion, organized religion, has played a key role in creating the crisis that we're in because of some of their belief systems. So I'll just, throw out quickly, we have some time left on this question, is it enough to say we have faith, or do we really need to rethink what that means for us as people of faith? And how do we go about doing that? Or as Einstein said, Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. Somebody
Well,
want to?
When
Go
I
ahead, Jim.
listened to what the three of you have said, what I was coming to the same conclusion you just articulated, Patrick, that we need to really rethink what will be the witness of religion in this interim period here, you know, in which the clock is ticking, and the word accountability. As agents of accountability, people of faith can in fact help move humanity to make the changes that science says we must. But I think it's often the case that as people of faith, accountability, as agents of accountability, like, wait, as a person of faith, that's my role. I use that as an illustration of what I believe with you, Patrick, I know, to be the profound shift our self-understanding of and practice of religion has to make.
Yeah, and I'd like to just chime in on that, is that I definitely agree with what's been said before. In addition to accountability, we need to look to see who is missing from the table. We also need to make sure that we're not trying to do a top down, but we're doing it in a manner that's accountable. And that we're using the expertise of all people, the expertise of the indigenous, those who are not at the table, who are most vulnerable and marginalized, who cannot speak for themselves or do not have the wherewithal that we have. So we have an obligation as people of faith, as humanity, to speak and to make sure that we're being inclusive, no matter where we are. Because if we don't, what's happening now is that this climate crisis is exacerbating existing economic, social, and ethnic racial injustices. It's really perpetuating those historical, structural, and systemic issues that have been kept all the people down for so long. So we need to look at it from a position of equity, but most importantly, we need to, I think, bring in the philosophy of the late Congressman John Lewis. If the table is full, we need to take the initiative to make sure we bring our own chair. If we see someone is not there, we need to make sure that we have a system in place to bring them to the table. And that's incumbent upon us as people of faith to make sure that happens.
Thank you. And Patrick, I appreciate the question as well. It is important that we look critically and deeply at the role that religion has played in getting the world to the point that we are now. Because in some ways, of course, there's a great treasure of wisdom, of cultural connection to nature, of a sense of the sacred, of taking time away from the sort of worldly measurements of material wealth to contemplate what is the deeper meaning of life. But in other ways, we know that faith institutions and networks have been interested in success according to the measures of the world, and that there have been ways in which they have partnered with destructive forces, colonization and empire, of course, being one of them, that specifically disrupted indigenous peoples' spiritual ties to their local ecosystems, saying that you cannot feel that it is sacred, that your spring is sacred, your river is sacred, your grove of forest is sacred, because in fact, we are the arbiters of what is sacred. And we know that happened as a pattern. That is also why the engagement of faith leaders is so important, to try to detoxify that legacy, to try to reverse that legacy. And so I think it is really critical. Another aspect of this is exactly as Ruth was just saying, with the late John Lewis, and the notion of when you pray, move your feet, is so important, because when people are doing faith-based work, sometimes there is a temptation to sort of pat ourselves on the back for being people of faith. But really, it is about what we do in the world and the difference that we make. And so that is also critical.
Great, thank you. And I'll leave that question with this one quote from Thomas Berry, who was certainly a great faith ecologist, where he said that we either go forward with a single spirituality or we perish. And so we sort of have to think that way about. Our next question, how can our activism change to more effectively address the crises? And Ruth, I'll ask you to start because you already started answering that question in your last response. So.
Yeah, I think mine is fairly simple. It's a simple statement, but it's a complicated way of implementation. We have to move from activism to action. And we can garner all the headlines and we can do whatever it takes to create the atmosphere. The atmosphere has been created, no pun intended, but the atmosphere, we see the climate crisis. We know the climate crisis. You know, in the span of a month, we've had 2 hurricanes to come to the US. And on top of that, we had a hurricane to hit Louisiana on the very same day a few years ago when Hurricane Katrina hit. So we're seeing devastation after devastation. We're seeing areas like Puerto Rico, which is disconnected from the Reservoir, who are still recovering from Hurricane Maria. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we're going to see these devastations again. So we have to move from activism to action. That means when we're starting to talk to people, we also have to be able to bring in people. We know that for some reason, unfortunately, when you start talking climate change, it creates a political divide. We got to find a way to get beyond that, to build with language that resonates with people. And so how do we bring them in? And then when we start to talk, what can I do? What can the community do? What can we do as a locale, as a state, as a nation to move things forward with metrics that are measurable? The bottom line is we've got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, eliminate, and we've got to get to net zero by 2050. And we don't have a choice. We have to do it, and time is running out.
Ron?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the question of how can we change our activism? Well, first of all, I do think we need to support each other in all different forms of activism. And as long as I've been around the climate movement, there's a lot of second guessing and self-criticism and criticism of others. You know, you shouldn't say it this way. You should say it this way instead. You should do it this way instead. And part of that is actually really healthy in terms of working through this as a movement. But I think we also have to recognize that we each as individuals, as communities, have our own assignments and our own callings for how we go about this work. And it will take a great diversity and creativity of efforts. And so I think we need to respect that. I also really believe that we, as Ruth alluded to, we need to reach out to those that aren't already with us. We need to take advantage of one of the great strengths of religious belonging as a facet of human life, which is that there are these shared values that people hold in common across political lines. And of course, this can be done with those who are not yet on board with climate. We need to recognize that there are many, many people out there whose interpretation of their religion actually blocks them from climate action. They say, well, this is part of God's plan, or this is evidence of the coming of the end days, or whatever it is. God would not do this. All-powerful God would not do this. These are conversations that need to not be derided, actually, or ridiculed, but respected and engaged, because often they mask fear and anxiety, those very elements of the human experience that call for pastoral care. And so we need to be able to embrace that and not be too rigid in our stances to do that. So I think we need to change in that way. One final thing that I will say is the civic engagement, the piece that really encourages people to actually talk to their elected representatives to understand where decisions are being made locally, state, nationally, and global policy-wise, and to to make it a comfortable part of a discussion of one's values, that it is naturally, just as if one might go into a politician's office and argue for famine relief or for humanitarian care, that we also say, rather than just dealing with the level of effects, let's deal with the level of cause. We are here to ask you to deal on the level of cause. What's going to cause the next storm, the next famine. We can actually act right now to change. And so I think that civic engagement is really important as well.
So I would add to what Karenna and Ruth have so articulately stated something else, and this might shock some of the listeners here. And this comes from the Yale group on that do a lot of polling around climate change. Over the past 5 years, the proportion of Americans who are now alarmed about climate change, it's more than doubled. But even though 25% of Americans are alarmed about climate change, 2/3 of them keep it to themselves. They never talk about climate change. So as Karenna was suggesting, in addition to talking to people who are obviously resisting this idea, even people who are alarmed about it, they need to be encouraged and find ways to get beyond what may be their grief, what may be their sense of lack of power. They need to get beyond that and talk about their alarm and talk about climate change, because that is the first step in, as this question suggests, in actually shifting our activism into action. Then I'll just say something briefly, and Patrick actually may want to extend this comment, though he may have plenty else to say. For more than 10 years, I've been encouraging people of faith to make nonviolent civil disobedience a normative expression of faithfulness, every bit as much as prayer is a normative expression of faithfulness. And if we look back at the record of the consequence of the Keystone XL pipeline demonstrations that I was part of back in 2011 and 2013, we see the Keystone pipeline has been shut down. So have dozens and dozens and dozens of other pipelines been shut down, because people were willing to put their bodies on the line. And now we have a situation where members of Congress over the past couple of years have also chosen to do nonviolent civil disobedience while they are in office. So I just want to put out there that this move from activism to action can and actually must, not for everyone, but plenty of us can engage in nonviolent civil disobedience, and it will help make the difference.
Yeah, let me jump in on that, having been arrested with Jim several times for nonviolent civil disobedience. I absolutely agree. And I think it's important to remember, not everybody's called to do that. Everybody's called to support that. You know, I many times have been participating in demonstrations where people will say to me, I just really can't go and get arrested. And I say, that's okay. We need people to come and support us and to pray with us and all of that. So it's not just the doing the civil disobedience. I also want to add to what Ruth started out with, going from advocacy to action and add to transformation, because we need to transform who we are as a society, who we are as individuals and who we are as a society. And we sometimes forget that part, that important step, I think, that, you know, it's not just about the action or the advocacy, but we really have to transform ourselves individually, and in doing so, help transform society. I also think, and Ruth touched on this a little bit, it is important that we really think about the language that we're using. And I actually learned this from Ruth. A couple months ago, I was invited to give a talk to a parish in Western Pennsylvania about climate. And I thought it was a really good talk. And I talked all about the Green New Deal, and I didn't once mention the Green New Deal. And Ruth taught me that don't do that. I remember her saying she was going up to, I think it was North Dakota, to give a talk, and she said she wasn't going to mention the Green New Deal. And I didn't say a word about climate change or the Green New Deal. And afterwards, everybody came up to me and said, what a great talk it was. And yes, you're absolutely right on all these points. If I had started off talking about the Green New Deal, nobody would have heard a word I said after that. So I think we have to really think about who our audience is in terms of the activism. And Jim touched a little bit on grief and the role grief plays. We always view grief as just something that we experience when we lose a loved one. But grief actually, we grieve when we lose a lifestyle. And we have to understand that, the 5 steps of grief, the first 2 are anger and denial. And what do we think is happening with all the people who are denying climate change? They're grieving over the loss of their lifestyle, but we're not giving them that space to grieve and helping them move on to the next steps. So I think particularly for people of faith, we have to think of it in those terms. So we'll move on to our third question. And I guess, Karenna, you get to go first on this one then. What is your call to action?
Well, my call to action is to talk about climate, to engage on this issue with the civic sphere of the decision makers. As I mentioned before, I think that many people are reluctant to get involved in what they see as politics or government. They don't see it as part of their faith calling, or they see it as a kind of toxic world that they don't want to be involved in. And it is precisely because of that actually there has been such a capture of that sphere by the interests that want to perpetuate this system. So my call to action is for people to really think deeply about how to get involved on that level of our self-government. This is, of course, global unity. So I realize not everybody will be in the United States of America. I do think that here we have that responsibility in this stage. We have an administration who has rejoined the Paris Agreement, but is also struggling to pass some of the legislation that we really need to in order to put it in place. We have reconciliation bills in the House. We have state level plans that will determine whether or not we really can take a leadership role in the world on this. So my call to action is to engage in government, and that is talking to your elected representatives, and not just voting, but actually raising your voice, calling their office, writing a letter, getting whatever institution or community you're a part of to do that as well. Even if it's not specific, you could ask the question, what are you doing to stop the climate crisis? And they will have to answer. Many of them are there taking note of how many calls they get. And so I think that is important.
Jim, Ruth, who wants to go next?
Ruth?
Okay. My call to action would be, no matter who you consider your higher being, is to pray for direction. Pray first. And center yourself, center where your space is, then center how you can make the best action going forward. First, I do say that how do we move from activism to action? But then who is missing from the table? Understand that. But like Patrick said before, and I have always been a big proponent of that, is making sure that I know who my audience is, making sure that I speak the language that they understand. It may be that I go into one area and I need to talk about water, or I may need to talk about food insecurity, or I may need to talk about drought. It really doesn't matter to me what I'm calling it, but I am still talking about those impacts of climate change. So what I am saying is to, number one, get a plan. I was reading a commentary this morning on chapter 11 in Ecclesiastes, and some of the commentary said it's almost like chopping wood with a dull axe. We've got to move from that dull axe. We've got to sharpen it. And the way you sharpen it, and I'm not talking about going on deforestation by no means, that. But what happens if you're hitting something with a dull axe, you're making lots of noise, you're making lots of, a lot of people can hear about it. But if you start to sharpen it, you become much more crisp, you become much more focused. And what we need to do is sharpen our expertise, become educated, understand the basics of it, understand what we need to do, and then also use all the gifts we're given from science, policy, legislative, law, understand where we can make the best road going forward, make the best inroad going forward. It will take it's going to take a multidisciplinary action, which means we're going to need everybody at the table. So my call to action is pray to whoever your higher being is, look for direction. Number two, make sure that you're being inclusive and that we're not dictating, but accompanying people. And then what action we'll need to help them move along. When we accompany, we don't direct. We help to see, we listen. And most importantly, we need to listen and to get language that resonates with our audience.
Well, this is great response to this question from both Karenna and Ruth. And I'll add something simple to it. And I'm actually drawing from my mentor, Henry Nouwen, that Patrick mentioned at the beginning. And that is that religious leaders and people of every faith persuasion, we need to accept as our common vocation, our common call from God, the opportunity, the gift of being alive at this most critical moment of human evolution, when God is calling our generation to restore our common home. We need to frame this as an opportunity to step into that place that God is calling us to go. Or as Patrick said at his conclusion of his previous comment, to be part of the transformation that is needed. But in order to transform, we need to shift from what may be our understanding of what God had been calling us to be and to do, to a new understanding. And I'll also use the word that Karenna used, a new understanding of engagement. Because there is no God that I understand that isn't calling upon this generation to become engaged with the greatest moral crisis humanity has ever faced.
And I'll add to that I also think it's important that we start to look at climate as not a separate issue from all of the other issues. You know, immigration, food shortage, they're all the same issue. They're not separate issues, and they're all connected to each other. It was one of the, joys I had when I was executive director of FAN was we worked on all of these issues. So we got to view them not as separate issues. And I didn't have staff people who worked on this issue or this issue. We worked on them all as one issue. And it comes down to how we view ourselves, how we view society. Are we interested in the common good versus our own individual good? We look at a tree, for instance, and we see a tree, and the only intrinsic value that is given to a tree is the value of the wood, or maybe the value of the land after we cut it down. So its only value really is the value once we cut it down. It has no value in itself of just being there as a tree. And that's not how God created. That's not how we should be living our lives. That's when I say transformation, I'm talking about a transformation to how we see ourselves in relation to the rest of creation. And as Ruth said, whoever your God is, whatever your higher being is, that's fine. We all don't have to call God the same name, but we have to view our relationship with God in the same way. And that for me is what my call to action is now is to move in that direction of transformation so that we're looking at everything from the perspective of the common good. So we do have a few more minutes if you all want to have a few last comments. Or Rick, do you want to add anything before Karenna, Ruth, and Jim give their
Well, so many interesting things have been said. I guess the frame that I work with is this expanding concept of we and we consciousness, right? So many people think of we as being, my circle of loved ones, what are we doing on the weekend? Meaning, family, maybe very close friends, that kind of thing. But does it include your pets? Does your we include your plants? Does your we extend outward to your communities and your not just your nation, but your entire world with all of life and even the ecosystems that support life. So this is an expanded concept of what we is, and I think that if people move towards that, or let's say if there's a shift in our culture towards, from me to we sometimes do this, going from a me-based society to a we-based society. So if we have that cultural shift, then it becomes very clear that the well-being of each member of our society, and that includes non-humans, is essential to the survival and the well-being of all of the planet. And it's that concept that I would like to see, moving towards. So it gets away from the hierarchical concepts and the individualistic thing, which has been an aspect of American culture in particular, but many other cultures. So I guess that would be my response. And one other thing about the call to action, I want to bring up this new campaign that we are pushing out now, called We Power America, which is a subset of We Power the World. And it's a renewable energy media campaign and movement builder. And it's focused on the United States because the United States, to start at least, the United States is one of the largest polluters on the planet, and it has a huge effect, and it affects the whole planet really in terms of socially, politically, environmentally, and militarily, economically, and all of that. So we want to mobilize millions of people to take part in making this transition to renewable, non-polluting energy systems being the primary energy system in the United States. And at the same time, it's a double meaning. We Power America. It's also about we power, the power of we, to transform our society and how people can come together to create the society that they want to live in. And that message of we is also important now when we are living at a time of extreme political polarization, because I believe, and I think everyone on the panel believes, that we have more in common than we have that divides us. And if we can start to shift the conversation to what we have in common, and that language piece that Patrick and Ruth and others were talking about, I think it's very simple to get people kind of on board, because we will be talking at this level of meeting people's needs instead of the labels that people put on things like even the label climate change is a political label now. And you know, the Green New Deal is a political label, and you know, the political parties are labels. And if we can go beyond labels to see the commonality in all, then I think we'll be on our way to having a livable future.
Thanks, Rick. And just to add one more label, you're sounding more and more Franciscan every day.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Jim, Ruth, or Karenna, any of you have any last comments to make?
I'll just be very short. I have two grandsons, Declan and Zay. Declan is 10, Xavier is 5. Well, actually almost 6. I want to leave a world that is sustainable and habitable for them. So and I think getting back to Rick's point, that is one thing that I believe is an area of commonality. Our kids, grandkids, and future generations. If we put them in the forefront, and each time we think about something, we think about the life that they will have if we don't act. I think that will be a way to bring things home. Everybody loves their children. They love their grandchildren, and you want a better world for them, not one that's less. So thinking about the future generations, working to make sure that they would have a sustainable, resilient world.
Thank you. Jim, Karenna?
Well, I would close my part out, at least by sharing a quote that I often share with people. It comes from Walter Munk, who was a world-renowned oceanographer. He recently died at age 100. And once he was asked, what will it take to solve the climate crisis? More or less our first question. And his response was this. He said, it will take a miracle of love and unselfishness. And I believe that God is calling our generation to make that miracle real.
Amen.
Thank you. And I will just add, inspired by Rick's explanation of the we and the expanding we, that I do believe that we are called to end this illusion of separation from the rest of the natural world. This illusion that in some cases has been bolstered by interpretations of certain religious texts and traditions, and see that the we does include non-human life. The we does include, even across the broad space of the planet, the deforestation in the Amazon will affect us and the air that we breathe here. We could even see in this country the smoke from the wildfires on the West Coast recently was felt and seen as far as the East Coast. So the we includes non-human life all over this planet, and it is so genuinely moving. And thank you for that note of actual joy, Jim, in this, that we live in this moment where we are realizing that oneness of life, which is also core to all faith and spiritual traditions on some level. We're realizing that oneness, and we're also having the gift of the good aspect of technology, where we can actually come together as one in a way that we weren't able to before, such as in this wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for convening us.
Let me just say thank all of you. It's just a joy and pleasure to be with you again, and to have these. We should have more of these because they're easy to do. And thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to working together again in the future. Rick?
Exactly. Yes, thank you all so much. I want to let people know again that you can find out more about what's going on with 11 Days of Global Unity and actually take part in any of these 11 campaigns for change by going to we.net. And also the program that I was talking about before, We Power America. If you go to we.net/WPA, you can get involved and join and support that. And I think today, with our discussion, we accomplished one of our big goals with doing events with We the World, which is to inspire, inform, and involve. 3 eyes that make a we. So thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
3 eyes that make a we. So, well, that was a lively conversation, right, Patrick?
I thought it was great. Hearing it a second time, I thought it was even better. You know, I'm just always amazed. I have such intelligent friends and great people. So I don't really have to do much. I just call on them to do it all. And it's wonderful.
That's right. That's how I feel about calling you. So I don't have to do anything. I just call you and then, you know. So anything jump out at you folks since, you know, hearing that?
I think a common theme was that we are running out of time. It's time for us to act. I think that was a common theme. And I think that resonates is that we need to make sure that we act with intentionality. I don't think those words were exactly used, but I got the impression based on some comments that we have to become more intentional now.
And I'm going to agree with Ruth on that, and more intentional both with our own personal lives and how we live our lives, and also more intentional with how we interact with the rest of creation. I mean, they're two they go hand in hand, but we have to really think in both sides and work on both of them. And we only have a short period of time. You know, it used to be, and Ruth will remember this, and you might remember this, Rick, years ago when when I first started this work and on environmental justice work, we started talking about sustainability. And I remember people saying back then, if we don't start changing and move forward on sustainability, eventually we're going to be talking about survivability. And we've reached that point where we're now talking about survivability. We're not really talking sustainability anymore. We're talking about, can we survive? And it's kind of sad that we've come to this point, but that's where we're at. We don't have a lot of time left to change. So as Ruth said, now is the time.
Now is the time. And, you know, one thing about that, I still see a kind of a divide in people's intention and sense of urgency. It is starting to change. However, there's still a sort of a lagging concept of climate change being something that future generations are going to have to deal with, as opposed to now. I know there's more and more media about the wildfires and the floods and the hurricanes, but it still doesn't quite get you as much as like an instant incident, like we've been talking about on the Unity panel. Sharon Ria brought up the question: Does humanity need a crisis a crisis like 9/11, like the terrorist attacks, in order to become united and come together to solve a particular problem? So it's still a little bit fuzzy, you know, because it's not like it's happening on a dime, like even an accident, like a plane crash or something, or a terrorist attack. You see what I'm saying? So it's coming around, but it's that sense of urgency that people like us feel. I'm not sure that the general public feels that in that same way. What do you think?
I tend to agree with you. Unfortunately, during the whole, and we're still living through COVID-19, I often compared COVID-19 and climate change to be, COVID-19 was like a sudden onset event. Climate change It's more like a long-term onset event. I mean, so I see COVID-19 like a hurricane or a tornado that rips right at you. Climate change, like the sea level rise. And I think people are still compartmentalizing that. But in reality, there's a disconnect with understanding that the intensification of hurricanes, from the frequency to the severity, whether you're talking about winds or the amount of water that's being dropped from a hurricane, is exacerbated by climate change. And I think that disconnect still has not resonated with some people. And I am struggling with how to make that connection. So I definitely agree with you. And because climate change is so broad and it touches everything that we do, I think in some cases, people see the wildfires, they see the flood in Germany. And even if it happens to me, this happens to be once in a lifetime event, and they're not really connecting the dots. And I think, unfortunately, we're not listening to the science in the way that we should listen to the science and bringing all those variables together to begin to address climate change. So I definitely agree with you. And I don't think that it has really hit home quite yet.
And I'll jump in on that. I agree with everything Ruth said. I think it's more than the science, though. I think, as I had said in the presentation, the whole issue of our faith and our theology that teaches us that we're only here to go someplace else. And so this is just, for a lot of people of faith, they view the earth as a temporary way station. We're just here for a short while, and our goal really is to get to heaven. So what we do here, it's not that important. What's important is only that we do whatever is good, hold our hands the right way, pray the right way so we can get to heaven. And as long as we have that view and that theology, then we're not going to take climate change seriously, because we're just going to continue to view it as we're here temporarily. And I really have to just move along so I can get to heaven. And, for Christians, that's especially true. And, we're completely missing the message of Jesus in that, and this discussion, their discussion, that, the whole idea of the incarnation was not about Jesus coming so we could go to heaven. It was about, the incarnation was about creating heaven here on earth. And we should be focused on creating heaven here on earth. And what does that look like? And how do we do that? And how does that incorporate all of creation? How do we reach out and love all of creation and be connected to all of creation? We have that. Ruth mentioned that disconnect. We have this strong disconnect, not just from the science, but we have a disconnect from our spirituality and our faith as well. And we have to bring the two of those together. It's really interesting to me, if any of you are familiar with the work of Teilhard de Chardin. So Teilhard was a Jesuit priest. He was also a paleontologist, and just a brilliant man who was one of the first Christian leaders to talk about evolution from a faith perspective. Most of us and people of faith, we still separate evolution and our spirituality. A lot of us think we're woke Christians because we believe in evolution, but we don't connect that to our spirituality. And we have to learn that our spirituality is about here and now, and about everything that happens here and now, not about going off someplace else, somewhere in a distant future.
Yep, definitely.
And I didn't mean to get too esoteric there, but
No, that's great. So I see someone, I think on Facebook, Jana Larson said the Reverend Dr. William Barber says the "we" is the most important word in the language of justice for people and animals and for the environment. So she was kind of reacting to
that's
that.
a great comment. And I think, again, it gets to the point of how we define we. And we define we as, our small communities. Do we define we as just we as humans? Do I define we as a white male, and so my we is just the universe of white males, leaving out people of color? We've done that throughout the course of our history of civilization. We've defined we really in separate groups, and how do we bring all that together? So, as both of you have said, the we really means the we.
And I think the we also brings together a responsibility for us. And I think Rick may have said it before, Patrick, that, the rest of creation, the non-human form of creation, can't really speak for themselves. And we would not have the life we have without the rest of creation. We have something very, very much in common with all of creation. We are all created from the dust, and we will all go back to the dust. So we've got to bring the we to understand that it does talk about the animal. It does talk about the fact that through our capitalization and our building, we've destroyed habitat, we've destroyed biodiversity, the biodiversity which is key to our existence. So we've got to look at it more than a humanity perspective, but we've also got to look at it as part of all of the creatures that were created for this plant, for this animal, it's everything.
Exactly. So, yeah. So any other thoughts? One thing I was struck listening back to our interview before, Jim was talking about the importance of civil disobedience. And it's always interesting for me to see people who are people of the cloth and people of faith putting their bodies on the line. And it's interesting because it's, I guess I just don't think of it that way. When I was growing up in my Episcopalian church, and I was also an organist in a Catholic church for 5 years. When I was from being 18 years old to about 23, I was in there. The clergy in those places did not seem like the kind of people who would even go to a protest, So it's always very impressive to me to see anybody putting their bodies on the line for a cause, the cause of the common good. But people in clergy, and maybe it's shifting a little bit in that. Would you say, Patrick, there is a shift going on in the circles?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think. First of all, let me clarify that, because we always use the term nonviolent civil disobedience. And I think it's important in this day and age to make sure that folks understand that when we talk about civil disobedience, we are talking about nonviolent civil disobedience. And I've done workshops on nonviolent civil disobedience. Whenever we were doing nonviolent civil disobedience in Washington, we had training programs for people ahead of time. We met with the Capitol Police, so they understood what we were doing. We let them know ahead of time what we were doing and that we were going to be nonviolent. And, if people, we had asked people to sign forms that they agreed with what we were doing, so that there wouldn't be any issues of violence involved in it. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, the difference. And, generally we would go over and we would kneel down and pray. And that was our form of nonviolent civil disobedience. I think, as Ruth had said, it's now is the time, and a lot of people of faith and clergy people understand that now is the time, in that, it's not about preaching the gospel on Sunday. It's about living the gospel every single day. And what does that mean? And, I'm part of the Franciscan family, and St. Francis of Assisi practiced nonviolent civil disobedience and often did nonviolent civil disobedience. So it's not something that's brand new. It's been part of our tradition, Christian tradition, and other religions as well, forever. But it's, becoming more and more frequent over the last few years, as more and more faith leaders are willing to step up and do that. And they're more and more willing to preach it It's a difficult job being a preacher because you got to satisfy both sides. But there are a number of outspoken preachers and faith leaders and theologians that are willing to challenge the system. I have a really good friend, he's a Catholic priest, and he's the pastor of my parish. And he would often get up at the end of Mass and he would say, I hope I've made you feel uncomfortable, because if I haven't, I'm not doing my job. And so we have to, our clergy, our faith leaders, our job is not to make people feel uncomfortable. We're never going to change anything if we all sit around and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I like to sing Kumbaya, but that's not going to bring about change. People only change and transform when they're not in their comfort zones, when we push them out of their comfort zones. So that's what we have to do with faith leaders and its activist leaders.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Patrick said. Now, I'm not an activist in the street. That's just not my DNA. But what I do remember, one day I was walking through the Library of Congress, and I just happened to go to a room which had a video playing of a 64 conversation, late 1964 conversation between President Johnson and Martin Luther King. They had just gotten the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. And King was being relentless. That wasn't good enough. It was good, but it wasn't good enough. He wanted a Voting Rights Act passed. And Johnson said, listen, you got the Civil Rights Act. There's no way I'm going to be able to get a Civil Rights Act, a Voting Act passed through Congress. But King, being relentless like he was, he didn't give up. And I think he wore Johnson down, and Johnson said, okay, go ahead and create the environment. 1965, we have a Voters' Rights Act. So there's a place for activism. There's a place for active work. And we need everybody in that front. Everybody has a different gift. And we need to understand what our gift is and move and act on that. So activism is key because it helps to raise the issue. I'm convinced that without the activism in the street after the George Floyd murder, that we would not be in a position of raising the level of consciousness now. Now we need to act on that too. We really do. And I'm not talking about defunding the police, but what I am talking about is fairness and equity. And also this goes into climate change. We are, from a time-wise, very late in the game. We do have hope that we can still move, but I still think that there is still a place for activism, but we've got to move with lightning speed to action to make sure we reduce these greenhouse gas emissions to the point that we will have resilient societies.
Definitely. I was also thinking about Michael Lerner, and I know you know him, Rabbi Michael Lerner, Patrick.
I do.
Do you know that fellow, Rabbi Michael Lerner, Ruth?
No, I don't. No.
Okay, so he's the editor of Tikkun magazine and the founder of the network of spiritual progressives, and he's been one of those pioneers who has really been pushing the idea of spiritual politics. And really, MLK was probably one of the first people to bring spirituality and politics to kind of together in the ways that you were talking about. And then I see Michael Lerner as one of those folks too in the 80s doing that. And then there have been more and more of people like Marianne Williamson also brings spirituality to politics and that kind of thing. But anyway, I was thinking about Michael because I think, Patrick, you said you got arrested with Michael Lerner a couple of times or something like that.
Yes, I have, yes. And let me just clarify, I don't judge my friends based on whether we've been arrested together or not. So I consider both of you good friends, even though I haven't been arrested with either. But yeah, and it's, it's an interesting thing when you talk about spirituality and the coming together of spirituality and politics. And, being Catholic, I look at the impact Pope Francis has had. And when you say, you said earlier, Rick, that it seems to be changing, I think a lot of that has to do with Pope Francis and the words that his encyclical Laudato Si, and just, I know none of you are Catholic, so you don't really understand what an encyclical is, but an encyclical is a document from the Pope. And every encyclical prior to Laudato Si was written from the Pope to his brother bishops. And then it would go out and be distributed, but it was addressed to my brother bishops. Pope Francis wrote the encyclical Laudato Si to all people of goodwill. And so I think that a change started occurring with that, even before that, when Pope Francis got elected. But in Catholic world anyway, a change really started occurring when that happened, when Pope Francis got elected, and then started really shifting so that more dialogue started happening, and particularly around the issue of climate. And that really brought the faith together on the issue of climate with the work that he did. And, his encounter with Muslim leaders and with Greek Orthodox leaders and with Hindu leaders and with every faith person leader. So that's, it's part of our evolution, and that evolution is continuing. It's, like I think I said, Thomas Berry said, we either go forward with a singular spirituality or we perish. And Thomas Berry wasn't talking about our same religion. He was talking about our spiritual understanding of who we are in connection to each other and God. We can worship and celebrate that any way we want, but we have to have that basic understanding. And, I'm writing a whole piece now on the Sufi poet Rumi, this famous, I love his work, and St. Francis of Assisi, and how if you read their poetries, they're identical. They're very similar. And they both understood this, that they were from the same spirituality. One might have been a Muslim and the other a Christian, but the spirituality that they talked and write about was exactly the same. That's where we have to grow as people of faith. And then we can start to transform all of society.
Yep. I see that there's another message that came in from someone named Maria.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "You all touch me profoundly from Brazil that where there is separation and misunderstanding of religious participation. The evangelists massively went out in the streets supporting our president and creating more separation. Sad."
Well, that was certainly true here too. It was the evangelical Christians that got Donald Trump elected. But even before Donald Trump got elected, it was the evangelical Christians, that helped get Richard Nixon elected, helped get Ronald Reagan elected, and on down the line. And, and when I say evangelical, I let me clarify that I mean white evangelical Christians, because there's a large Black evangelical Christian movement. They preach a whole different gospel than Ruth and I would believe in. And so we have to, and that's what this woman talked about in Brazil is the same thing. It's, a gospel of separation. And again, it gets back to what I started out with. It's a gospel of being here so we can go there. And everything we do here should be about getting to heaven. And, this is a gospel that justified slavery because it was okay that we had slaves because we were helping them get to heaven. We were going to convert them to Christianity and help them get to heaven. It was okay that we took the children away from indigenous people in this country because we were going to make them good Christians and help them get to heaven. That's what we need to be moving away from. So,
all right.
Ruth answer, because I know you need to wrap up in the next.
Yeah, we do. Go ahead. Did you want to say anything?
I just want to echo everything Patrick said. I don't say ditto to everything he said. You'll find that evangelical movement is just not the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Mass, so it's not the ELCA members. I want to make sure that's clear, but
I think she's talking about in Brazil itself.
right, right. And oddly enough, when my kids were teenagers, they actually did a missionary trip from our church here in Reston to Brazil, and of course they didn't see the same things that they were seeing now, but we'll find that the evangelists are really focused on not the same types of issues. They probably interpret Genesis not the same way we do. The dominion of the earth is not really being geared to it, protecting, caring for the earth. So we really have to be careful when we need to see what people stand for, and are they really coming from the basis of the Bible when they're calling themselves evangelists and they're talking in this vein. So
there you go. So I want to thank everyone for this fabulous panel and the after discussion. So I want to thank Ruth Ivory-Moore, Patrick Carolan, Karenna Gore, Jim Antal. I'm Rick Ulfik, founder of We the World and the We campaign at we.net. And thank you again to Humanity Rising and Ubiquity University for broadcasting this and all of the panels of 11 Days of Global Unity. To find out more about the panels and get involved, please go to we.net. Thank you all so much.
okay. Bye.